only like 3 people who
Thank you. Well, I asked her today. Okay then.
I think it's okay.
So this evening study session is on priority-based budgeting, and we'll go from now until around 7, and then the budget CIP from 7 to 9:30. And for people in the audience and viewers at home, we have a new addition to our staff table, sitting between Jane Browdigam, our city manager, and Bob Icahn, our budget director, is Kankar, who's our new city attorney who was sworn in. Officially sworn in last Friday and accepted to the bar in Colorado. So welcome, Tom.
Thanks.
So Jane,
Thank you, Susan. So the first part of the study session tonight is about priority-based budgeting, and I'm going to do a really brief intro, and then John Johnson and Chris Fabian are going to show you some information that I think will be very interesting. They've got some slides that I hope they'll go through pretty quickly, but then they're going to turn on the computer and show you kind of a lot of the data that we are able to glean from the information that we've put together, and it's quite a drill down, and we think that it's really going to help us in the future. But just as an overview, you know, we've started priority-based budgeting last November with some staff training, and ultimately that led to a creation of definitions by the community and the staff working together that were brought to council in the early spring of this year that council approved, and we moved forward based upon those definitions to figure out all the different programs that we have in the city, and you saw that there are very, very many of them. And we tested the programs against the results that our community wants to achieve and against the definitions that define those kinds of goals, and came up with ways in which to sort the various programs that we have into quartiles, with the first quartile being those programs that most effectively reach our goals, and those in the fourth quartile that are not quite as successful as achieving the goals. Some things that I want to point out about priority-based budgeting are, first of all, and I've said this for a long time, is that all of the programs that we have in the city have a constituency. So we're not providing programs that people don't want or don't like. We're providing programs that people love and that are very important to the city. So no matter where a program ended up, it nevertheless means that they're all good programs, and we all want all of them, but some are less effective at achieving the ultimate goals of the city than others are. The second point is that this is the first year of priority-based budgeting, and because it's the first year, we discovered a couple of glitches along the way. And as we go through the budgeting process behind the scenes, as we prepare the city manager's budget, we're making note of the things that we find to be anomalies, and in the fall, we're going to sit down as a staff team and kind of address those anomalies. I think some of you pointed out in your emails to us or in other, in the CAC discussion that we had earlier this week, that it would seem odd that one program that seems very related to another, like police and municipal court, would come out in different places on the array. But they did, and so we need to take a look at why that happened, and for next year kind of tweak that part of the process. And then the third, and maybe the most important point, is how we're going to use this information as we move forward in the budget. And we're going to use it as another point of information. Obviously, as the city manager and as our staff team works toward preparing the budget, we want to have a budget that will be the very best for the community. And with the gathered years of experience and information that we all have, I think our business sense and our understanding of the community and the wishes of council will take the top lead on how we prepare the budget. But this new information will help us figure out ways in which maybe there are efficiencies. Some things that we've seen across the board are maybe there are programs that are very similar, provided in two different areas, that in the future could be combined for cost savings. And so it's raised things like that to the surface. So this will be used as one piece of information as we move forward with the budget. And we're going to make this budget based on the best business case that we can make for our community and for our city. So I hope that that's of some interest to you. Now I'm going to introduce John Johnson and Chris Fabian, who you've seen before, and they're going to talk pretty quickly about some of their slides and then show you how cool the data is that we are able to access.
Thank you. Just so we'll refresh your memory, I'm John, this is Chris. I'm the older one of the two, so you can or I guess mature is what I was cautioned yesterday, but that would make him immature, and that's not really what we want to set the tone. We're very pleased to be back here again in front of you to talk about the work that the City of Boulder has accomplished with priority-based budgeting. When we started this process, we were beginning to work with several other organizations. We had done the work with a few organizations, and so the City of Boulder benefited from what we had learned from those other organizations. Now we have almost 17 communities that are going through this process, and the work that we have done in Boulder is influencing the work that's being done in other communities across the United States. So we have examples and we have ideas that have come about from the work we've done in Boulder, especially in the citizen engagement component that is really helping other communities find ways to make a difference in their priority-based budgeting process. So we're pleased to be here. We're pleased that this project has been so embraced by the staff. We are impressed each time we come up here with the commitment of the staff and the work that they have done. This is a hard-working group of people, and we're just pleased with the product that has come about because of that hard work. So we'd like to talk just very briefly about the process and how it unfolded in Boulder, and then we want to show you the resource allocation tool that's been created based on the information that's been gathered through this process. And as has been pointed out, we think it's very useful and very interesting information that can be helpful in supplementing the budget process for the City of Boulder. Just very quickly, I know you've seen this slide. It just emphasizes that across-the-board budget cuts are not the way governments really can continue to address their fiscal situation. We're looking for those programs that are the mortgage payments of government, those that are the high priority, that if things have to change, we need to keep these in order to keep the city relevant and serving its citizens the best way possible. The first step is determining the results, those high-level overarching outcomes. And you've seen these. These are the outcomes that were generated through the work of staff, through your community surveys last year, and through the information from the council, so that we're looking to say that the City of Boulder exists to be an accessible and connected community, an economically vital community, a healthy environment and a healthy community, an inclusive and socially thriving community, and a safe community. And so this is the starting place against which we have evaluated the programs.
In step two, this was the point of a lot of the citizen meetings that took place earlier this year, and that's to take some of those very high-level results like a safe community and work with citizens to discuss what does that actually mean for the City of Boulder. As you can imagine, in many communities across the country that we're working with, everybody has a result like a safe community. The important thing is to get to what does that actually mean for Boulder so that we can put a specific definition around it. So we created result maps as a result of all the citizen work and the departmental work to try and answer the question, when the City of Boulder talks about a safe community or an economically vital community, here's what they actually mean. So these are the result maps that resulted, and these were used for the basis of the program scoring.
And as was pointed out, with the City of Boulder, there were 443 programs that came about as a result of the work. And this is where we think the benefit, the conversations change from department versus department to all the programs that the city offers, and how do we evaluate them one against another. And as in every community, every department has high priority programs, and every department has some programs that are a lower priority in terms of how they achieve the results. So we think that this helps even the playing field, so the discussion isn't, is police more important than parks? Is the library more important than public works? We're really getting down to all the individual programs and services and start to educate the public on the diversity of local government and how so many of these programs have been a wonderful thing, but as times change, as we look towards the future, can we still be everything to everyone? And we have to start making perhaps some difficult decisions. We don't know where the economy is going to land us, so we want to make sure that we're prepared if the situations warrant, that we can start looking at our programs and how relevant they are. are. So we applaud the city. The staff did a wonderful job in putting together their program inventories so that we could demonstrate this. In fact, because of the work that we're doing in program inventories, the Government Finance Officers Association is starting to look at a best practice in terms of all governments having to put together program inventories, because this is a new concept, but it's a new educational concept. So you're well in front of the curve when that particular recommendation comes out.
So with the results that you had identified, and then the work that the citizens had done to actually put a definition around those results, and then the staff going through and identifying all the programs that you do, step forward included how do we compare all of the programs across the organization on the same relative basis. And this, what you see up there, are the scoring criteria that staff used as they went through a program scorecard and talked about over there on the right-hand side. Those are your results. So if you remember, they took all of their programs and they tried to convey their argument about whether the programs had a high degree of influence or some degree of influence or no influence on each of those particular results as they were defined by the community. Furthermore, what you see to the left, there were other characteristics of programs that we recognize make them important for local government to consider a high priority. And those are things like, is the program mandated? Is there a state or federal mandate associated with it? Is there something in your city charter to include with that requires the city to provide a program? Is there a reliance on the city to provide the program? Do citizens truly depend on the city of Boulder to provide it? Or are there other service providers in the area as well? There's another scoring criteria. Is the program able to sustain itself by its own user fees or program revenues? That was another criteria that was used in the scoring. And finally, another one of those additional characteristics besides the results was the overall trend and the change in demand for the service. So could we anticipate either an increasing change in demand or a decreasing change in demand? So it's as a result of all of these categories that we could compare programs on that same basis, that same playing field.
One of the elements that we wanted to make sure was introduced, and again, we were very impressed with the process here in the city of Boulder. The staff engagement in the peer review process was very impressive. Chris and I were able to participate in several of those meetings and found that there was a great deal of very excellent conversation about the programs and lots of suggestions in terms of maybe there were some similarities, maybe there was some cooperation that could exist. But the peer review process, as you recall, this is where a group of people that may not be so familiar with the programs look at the way the departments have scored those programs and ask questions in terms of do they agree with the relevance that was assigned to that program to the particular result. So there was, for example, a Safe Community Results team who looked at all the programs and services that scored themselves as being relevant to Safe Community and evaluated whether or not they believed that that score truly represented their understanding of the program and how it achieved the result. We found that there were some changes in the scoring that the peer review team recommended. What was interesting is in Boulder, there were probably as many recommendations to increase the score that the peer review team felt that the departments had been a little harder on themselves than they should have been, as well as those where they suggested to reduce the score. And so peer review was really used to help validate the department's scoring process to ensure that any questions about that program and how it relates to the results were asked, questioned, and the departments had the responsibility to come and give their best case for why they believe that program should be scored against that result in the way it was. So peer review here we felt was extremely successful, and we thought that the engagement of the staff that was involved in doing this process was quite remarkable.
One last quick point on peer review, just to make it tangible. Boulder implemented one final appeals process. So for the program scores that were of 2 points or more, the departments had one more chance to come back to the group and appeal the scoring change. And of all the scores that were changed, less than 1/10 of 1% of all those scoring changes were appealed. So to us, that had significant meaning statistically to talk about the buy-in of the scores and the effectiveness of peer review. So finally, and I think you remember this from the presentation, all programs at the end of peer review, we can see from top to bottom on a relative scoring scale, we can see, as Jane was talking about, kind of that top tier, that first quartile of programs, which is a little bit different, a little bit higher score than quartile 2, quartile 3, and quartile 4. Across the entire city, you see on this chart, there were 103 programs that ended up in quartile 1, 134 programs across the city in quartile 2, 119 programs in quartile 3, and 87 programs that ended up in quartile 4. And again, all that means is the 87 programs in quartile 4 had a little bit similar scores as compared to the programs in 3, 2, and 1. Now, if we put together all the costs around each of those programs, that's what you see represented in this bar chart. That's the amount of money spent on quartile 1 programs, is that approximate $77 million in excess for those 103 programs. In quartile 2, with more programs in quartile 1, the costs were actually less, so not all programs cost the exact amount. Quartile 3 with 119 programs was a little bit less, and then there's a little bit less resources going into quartile 4. What that suggests to us, this was the first array that actually looked like this, where there was the majority of resources put in quartile 1, a little less in 2, 3, and 4. Most of the other cities that we work in have a little bit less in quartile 1, maybe a large chunk in 2, and then quartile 3 sometimes exceeds quartile 1. They have perhaps more opportunities to look at some of their lower quartile or lower relevant programs. In the city of Boulder, what it potentially suggests is that relative to the results that you've identified, the majority of the dollars are oriented or invested towards reaching those results as they're defined.
And I think this points to a factor that when we first were talking with Bob, there was a belief that over the last few years the city had been trying to look at the relevance of its programs and was it allocating its resources in the best way possible. And we feel that this process has validated that the city indeed has been working over the last several years in their budget process to make sure that they were funding more highly relevant programs to achieve the results that the citizens were expecting. And so while there's not a right or wrong profile, we look at this profile as being a very healthy one in terms of concentrating your resources towards those programs that achieve the highest priorities. Some organizations have a lot more low-hanging fruit that they can pick from because their lower quartiles are not are a little bit more prevalent than what you see in your profile. But I think it still points out that there are still some opportunities for discussion. And as Jane pointed out, we want to emphasize this tool is merely a way to open up discussions, to ask questions, to look for ways to analyze the data and come to a consensus on what should we do and how should we approach our problems. And so we feel like your profile is healthy, but there are still some opportunities where some healthy discussions will also be able to unfold as this tool continues to be used in the budget process here in Boulder. What we want to shift to is the live tool that the city has been provided to start focusing on those conversations. And we'd like to spend the rest of the time demonstrating how the tool works, what are some of the options that you have, and then certainly after that, we'll be able to answer any questions you might have about Boulder's process or about the tool itself. And then I think staff will be available to answer any questions specific to how the model is going to be used as they unfold the next year's budget.
So once again, this is that exact same picture that we were just looking at in the PowerPoint presentation. So this represents across the entire city, when all programs are considered from all different funding sources, this is your complete profile. Now, because of the information that we have on programs, we can go through and look at all the various funds that you have and say we wanted to look at, of this exact same profile, what's happening in the general fund. So if we go back to citywide just for a second, you see that all the programs combined of the direct costs that we have identified for operational programs is about $165 million. But when we go to the general fund, this is the total amount of money for programs funded by the general fund, and you can see that particular profile. We can go and look in the 25% sales tax fund and look at that profile, or the affordable housing fund, and see all the programs that are funded by that particular fund. What component of that complete overall array belongs to that fund. Does that make sense to everybody?
Mm-hmm. And we think this is important because government budgeting still has to be done according to the sources of funding. And so this gives you that profile. I think it opens up discussions, especially where you have special revenue funds, where you might see, boy, these special revenue funds are really truly meeting our results. But what if in some organizations the converse may be true, that we have some special revenue funds, but they're not really hitting the results that we want to achieve. So it opens up again that conversation about the purpose of those funds and how we might be able to have conversations about what could we do to change that profile. But it's important that we're able to establish this tool to follow government budgeting principles and be able to still look at things on a fund basis, but yet be able to step back and have a citywide array of how your spending profile looks regardless of the funding source that might be providing the amounts for those programs to be funded through.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Is that something that we can see, use? Where is it?
Yes, I mean, it's a program that's owned by the city, and so it's public, but we'd have to make arrangements, I guess, for you to come in and figure out a way to get that to you. So.
The departments also have this, so they can work with it, so.
Right.
Can work on it.
There's a moment of pride. Most council don't actually want to look at them up.
Well, this is Boulder.
So Crystal and Megan?
Yeah.
Same question as George, and as I was going through the attachment A in here, I mean, I had so many questions. I didn't understand the titles or this or that, or how many people were associated with programs. So if you look at that, screen, is there something that will give you more detail?
Yeah, let's get into that
Okay.
here in a moment. We'll walk through very quickly some of the basic functionality so that you have all the capabilities of the tool, and then we'll dive right into the specific questions. Besides the funds that we can toggle between, we can also go through, in this middle filter, we can see any of the departments and their share of that overall profile. So we can look at Housing and Human Services and see where do they belong. We can look at Parks and Rec, any department that you want. I think you get the picture. And that's where it becomes pretty helpful for the departments because they can see their exact spending array and how their programs turned out, especially where the resource allocation lies. But let's take a look at something like Parks and Rec. And if we went from the citywide perspective within Parks and Rec to just the general fund, you can see that that particular department has funding from multiple funds. So they can look at it and see if the general fund were of concern or if that was an area that they really wanted to focus on. We could see just the general fund component of the Parks and Rec department. So you can take those various combinations as well. All right. One last area we wanted to show you. Right now, this shows all of the estimated direct costs. One of the questions we knew was very important, also stemming from the Blue Ribbon Commission and some of your questions, were what component of this comes from specific program revenues? Those are revenues that come in specifically to support a program. And the question that always comes up with an organization is, if we decided not to do a program that generated its own fees, maybe we aren't saving money because that specific revenue that came in for that program also goes away. So it's another capability where we can take out the program revenues and focus just on those general government tax dollars that are used to fund the remainder of the programs. So if we looked at a program, or a department, like let's go back to Parks and Rec really quickly, we can see what are the general government resources that are used to fund the Parks and Rec department versus those program revenues that are specific. So we can go back and forth and see of the general government tax dollars, where are they going to be able to make some of their changes? Probably not on the program revenue side, unless they're talking about increased fees. But on the general government side, that's where they can talk about efficiencies.
But I think this also helps you as you're looking at maybe some of the lower quartile programs, those that are maybe a little less important. If you look at, there are some that are funded by program revenues, so perhaps they're fine because they're being paid for. But you look at the few from the general government revenues, there's still some programs that maybe are of a lower priority that are not being fully covered by user fees or grants or something that's specifically meant to cover the program. So it's a good place to start conversations about, well, maybe these aren't as important to the city. Should we be devoting our tax dollars to those, or should we look at where a fee might be helpful to at least partially defray the cost of that program? So rather than having to say those lower quartile programs might have to go away, maybe there's a different way to fund them. Maybe there's a way that the people that are really interested in those can do that. And so we think this gives you a picture where, again, you can engage in those conversations. Here's something that's not as important in achieving the results of the city, but maybe we can talk about, is it an appropriate conversation to look at generating some fees that would cover that lower program, the lower important program, but still have that program stay as part of the city.
The last thing that we want to show you, as Jane was talking about, is the ability to drill down into some of this information and actually find out what the programs are and get some specific questions that you might have about the programs. And this is a page where we've designed, remember those additional attributes. Is the program mandated? Is there a reliance on the city? Here we can really focus in on asking potential questions about your programs and see what they actually are. So for instance, if we wanted to know what are all of the programs in the city of Boulder that scored a 4 in mandated to provide the service, we turn that on and we come back, and here are all the programs across the city that actually had either a state or federal mandate or something in the city charter that required you to do that. that's always been a question that we get. What are we truly mandated to do? So this is a picture for the first time that we can really isolate that down, and we can do the same kind of filtering to see of those programs, what is sponsored by general government revenues, what are program revenues, and so on. So let's go back to direct costs. Say we wanted to know, remember that other category that was pretty interesting was reliance on the city to provide the service. And what if we just wanted to look at the programs that all of the citizens, let's put equal to 4, rely on the city to provide. Thanks. So of all the programs that you have, these are the programs that scored 4. So you can start to ask questions like that to the system and start to get a better idea. Most organizations that we work with, when the departments get their hands on this and they're starting to look through ideas, where might they start a conversation? Some of the questions that they ask are, what if we narrow this down to mandated services that are programs that scored less than a 3 in mandated, means there's not a real strong mandate to provide the service, right? And we also looked at reliance on the city to provide the service, and we said less than 3 for that category. So these are programs, there isn't a real strong regulation to provide it. And it appears that the citizens, at least as the programs have been scored, have other places to get a particular service. And we can go back and look at that array and say, wow, maybe this is a really interesting place to start the conversation. That if you're a department, you can go through and see what component of that is mine. Not to pick on Parks and Rec, but just they had an interesting array. And we can say, what are the programs that we have that there wasn't a really strong mandate, there are other options to get the service, and they might be quartile 4 or quartile 3. Here's a great place to start a discussion. What might we do? As Jane said, none of this means that it leads you directly to an answer about which programs to start to think about reducing, but it starts to beg the questions about programs that are best to start talking about. So. And if we really wanted to get fancy, this is once we define any of the filters for the programs that you're looking for, you can actually develop the list. If you come down here, and this was what I was worried about. This is a punchline. There's a higher level of security on your computer than mine, so in a subsequent model, you'll be able to generate the actual program list that goes along with that particular array. So there's a little bit of programming that went along with it. We've kept this all in Excel.
And so to your question, as we build this, if there's a specific idea about what some other information you'd like to link to it, we can show the program, the cost. Perhaps we can even add a column that says the number of FTE that are associated with that program. There are ways that this can be very flexible, so you can get some of that program information directly by looking at this first screen and understanding what are some of those combinations that you might have. And so the tool is meant to be flexible, the tool is meant to be utilized, and I think that when we first put it together, we were thinking that it would be something that mainly the budget office would use. But we're finding that in Boulder, and now that we're working with other organizations, it's a useful tool even for the departments to be able to find ways to understand their programs, where they fall in the quartiles, and start asking those questions as they're making recommendations to how they might be able to tighten the belt a little bit so that they can meet the expectations of the basic premise of our whole process is continue to spend within your means. Whatever that looks like, we want to make sure that that happens. One of the interesting things that Boulder did as well was they were using the tool to also look at any new budget requests and running them through the model to see if we were offering this program already, where would it fall? Would it be a high priority program or a lower priority program? So it helps assess through the tool whether or not this might be a program that should even be introduced and brought forward. I think that my experience for 30 years in being in government finance is that in good times, it's real easy to say, sure, we've got the money, let's fund the program. But the question is the program relevant to the results that we want to achieve? And even if we have the funds, should we start that program in the good times with the expectation that maybe in the bad times we've started something that really isn't helping us accomplish what we're looking for, and we may have to cut back on it. So it gives a way to evaluate it, and we salute the city for using this tool to also evaluate some of those new budget requests as they were being brought forward. So I think we've covered the basics. I know we've trying to be conscious of your time as well. We'd certainly love to answer any questions, any specifics that you would like to talk about the model, the process, and again, any specific questions about how the model is being used. I know that staff is prepared to answer those as well.
So, questions, Megan?
How is the model being used now, Jane, or what's your idea for how it's used? Is it used primarily in the city manager's office and finance, or is this something that the directors and other managers can use?
So the directors, each department has a version of this that applies to their department. So what we're hoping is that as a group, as we identify areas of synergy where two departments maybe are providing the same service, they can work together to see what are the resources that we in this department have aligned, what have you aligned, how can we bring those together? So that's a way that it can be used. We have financial analysts in each one of our departments, or sometimes they're shared, and those people have access to it so that they can get good data as they plan their budgets for the coming year. So we're trying to have it available to people to be very useful.
Okay. And is this, this looks like an Excel spreadsheet. It is?
It is.
So could it be put on the web so that it's accessed remotely, not running Excel, but so it would be truly web-based?
I'm sure Don Engel could answer that question better than I could, but it's a spreadsheet, and part of the reason that we designed it this way is so we wouldn't have to develop software, and then put a lot of money and investment into it. As part of our mission as a business is to keep everything low. But that being said, it's just a basic spreadsheet to the extent that any spreadsheet has ever been put online before. I bet it could be.
Yeah. And then for John and Chris, with step 4, where you score the programs on the basis of results and basic program attributes, is this to score? I gather this is some kind of numbering system, so you'd go down the 4 basic program attributes and you might give it a 1 to a 5?
The scoring basis was a 1 to a 4, or 0 to a 4. 0 meaning the program had no relevance whatsoever. 4 meaning that the program was extremely relevant to achieving the result. And so anywhere in between was a gradation in terms of how relevant that program was. So
but do you give a score then on each side, 1 the basic attributes and 2?
Right. Every program scores itself against each one of those items, because one of the things that we believe in this process is it's so important not just to say this program is associated with this result, but what programs actually help us to some degree achieve multiple results. And so we were looking through, and what we see in every organization, there are many programs that achieve more than just one result. And so they're scoring themselves against that relevance and also against those basic attributes so that we can get a good feel for what rises to the top. Obviously, a program that influences more results than just one to a high degree, plus maybe has some of those other factors that help rise it in terms of that overall prioritization score.
Matt and then Susie.
Yeah, I've asked this before, and I think some other people have too, and it's the question of how you can take slices of the information kind of horizontally across departments, and I always have this problem. I mean, we always look at things in a departmental structure, and yet if I were to ask how much money does the city of Boulder spend on human services, I wouldn't have a clue, because I consider things like, you know, what Parks does for reduced prices for kids or seniors or disabled people, and what the library does, and what a lot of other parts of the organization do. I have no way to get that slice, and I have no way to look at those programs and see how well they're doing and how much money we're spending on them, because we're so department-centric, just because it's the way we think, and also it's the way the money's kind of allocated. Yeah, I get that. But it just seems to me there's this whole set of questions that you can't ask, or we don't ask, and I think we don't ask them because we don't have answers for them, so therefore we don't ask them. But I think they'd be awfully interesting, and they'd also point out overlaps or places where you could get some efficiencies across departments, but we just don't see that because it's all siloed.
And what I'd offer is that while the model itself doesn't have that flexibility now, it's one of the enhancements that we're trying to work on. Because if you think in terms of across those result areas, we realize that, for example, when you're talking about economic vitality, that's not just the economic development department, that's all departments across the city. So in peer review, there was a listing of all the programs that contributed to economic vitality. And so it does exist. It isn't something that we have the tool ready to do, but we want to be able to provide that view as well, where you can go in and say, I want to see every program that scored themselves highly against a safe community where we defined it. So you're not going to see just police and fire and emergency response. You may see things in human services. You may see things in community development. And while it isn't something that's there right now, it's what we're working on for the next enhancement. And as soon as we have that, we want to be able to apply that to the Boulder model as well. But for the time being, you can also look at the peer review score sheets where every program that scored itself against one of your results, you could see across departments how those stacked up and where they were in terms of that relevance. And so I know that information is available and could easily be shared, so you can at least get the feel for a cross-departmental aspect of influencing on your results that might get you started at least to the question that you're wondering about.
Well, I mean, that would help, but I still think, and it's not just the work you did. I mean, I think it's also the way the city approaches these things, where we don't tend to look across departments, but there needs to be a way to integrate that and then to ask those questions. Another kind of set of questions that, my problem is I'm a computer science guy, I can think of a lot of questions, but it seems to me you might want to know things like, you know, for this set of programs which scored X and had certain characteristics, I really want to look at the ones that we spend more than some amount of money on per year, or less than some amount of money on per year, or whatever. And obviously, I mean, it's Excel. You can program it to do that, but you have to program it for each and every one of those questions, essentially. And that isn't so great from my perspective. I mean, I would have picked a different tool, but different conversation. And I just wonder, you know, how flexible this is in the long run. It's not probably that you can't make it do anything you want to do. It's how painful is it to make it do anything you want to do, and how much work do you have, how much kind of behind the scenes internal work do you have to do, as opposed to just somebody sitting there and saying, gee, I've got this question, let me ask. And poof, it pops up the answer. Instead of, well, I've got this question, I've got to call them. Somebody has to program it, and then in a month I can ask the question. Well, that gets old really fast. So, any thoughts about that?
Let me answer that. From a staff standpoint, when we went looking for a program, we weren't looking for that expansive of a program. We were looking for a way to say, how can we evolve? The business plan has taken us as far as we can go. We have no way to really prioritize more or take all these things that 85% have become essential, and how do we keep breaking those down? So that wasn't what we asked for. We asked for this type of a program because to us it was an evolution of the business plan. It is our first year. We would like to see it evolve to the future. It could sometime get to that. The things about getting information on programs, a lot of that goes to our basic, the very basic account structure of local governments. Even at the national level, there's ways you're going to report on expenditures or revenues. So those are things that we can work on over time, but we got what we asked for this year. It's a great starting point, and how can we make it better? And we always do in Boulder, so I think it's a good thing for us to look to the future, but I think for now it's given us a good starting point.
One last question. I don't know if you want to do these separately. It's really a question for you, Jane, not about the tool in particular. And that's, I guess, the perception, which is already the case, where, you know, people see something that's rated a 4 and it's like, well, this isn't very important to the community, or something like that. And that's not my sense of how it's intended to be used, or what the meaning is, which is fine. I mean, my sense, which you've kind of talked to a little bit, but it's, yes, you might focus on some of those, you might see if there are some overlaps or some efficiencies or what have you. But how do you deal with what is, inevitably going to be something of a public perception of, well, you could save money if you just got rid of all the stuff that's in Category 4. Look, you know, put it in the other programs and we'd be in great shape.
We talked about this from the very beginning because we knew that at the end of the day there was going to have to be a prioritization process, and some program would end up in the 4th category and not in the 1st. My answer is unsatisfactory. I cannot change the minds of other people. All I can do is try to say, as we have repeatedly, that this is not about cutting programs. This is about trying to prioritize and focus on the goals of the community and which programs are best at achieving those goals. We are going to use the quartiles to start conversations, as we've talked about, to try to find efficiencies. And I can say it over and over again, but only if people listen and see us in operation will they ultimately believe us.
Thank you, Matt. Susie?
Yeah, I really appreciate that last question, because that was one that's already bothering me, and just in hearing the way we're talking about it tonight, it's already setting us in that direction. I think the design is very interesting. I'm struggling to understand how this works for highly specialized programs within the city. Those that cross results, those that hit on all of the 4 program attributes are automatically going to be elevated in this model. But that doesn't mean you don't have a need for specialized programs. How do you accommodate that? Because many of those specialized programs show up in the 4th quartile, which doesn't surprise me. So how do you acknowledge that you need certain things, even though they're highly specialized? What pops into my head is the bomb squad or the SWAT team. When you need them, you need them. But they don't generate money. They, we hope they don't increase the demand for their services, etc. But they seem to me to fall out in terms of your scoring system.
Right, and that's one of the things that we noticed as we went through the budgeting process this year, and we're trying to look at this and see how it related. And we're going to talk about that this fall. But the answer to your question is that you're right. And the way that you account for it is that you hire good managers and good finance people who are smarter than the program, who say, yeah, it came out in the 4th segment, but that doesn't mean that we don't really need this program and we're going to keep it. So again, because we have an Excel spreadsheet doesn't mean that we live and die by the numbers.
So, and I agree with that. And I appreciated your comments earlier. I just wondered whether there was any way to accommodate those, acknowledging that you need some specialized kinds of programs, so you score them slightly differently because they don't score in this system. That's all. That's where I'm coming from, thinking that there might be a way to just acknowledge that and score it appropriately.
Yeah, it's driven so much by the results. What are the definitions of results? And what I saw, instead of looking at seeing specialized programs, was a lot of those in the 4th quartile are very, very good business practices. They are things you ought to do. But when we look at our results from the community, what's important to the community, the values of the community, those best business practices aren't going to fall into a lot of them and get high scores. However, we realize that as we're going through the numbers and through the budget, and so you have to make those adjustments. If we get in and start tweaking the numbers to just do it for this program or that type of program, pretty soon we've got all of the exceptions. So it's where the human aspect has to come into it and say, this is a good business practice, but what we can ask, is there another way to do this that's more efficient, more effective? Can we join with somebody else? Or is there another way of doing this completely? So it does generate, saying, the best accounts receivable program and assessments, that's a real good idea to centralize it, but how else could we do it? So,
and I agree with that, and I think those questions always need to be asked. I just struggle sometimes when I see a template that is applied generally across such a broad range of programs, and that the factors on which scoring is done just don't fit for some of those programs, so that they're disadvantaged in some way by the scoring. One other question that I will throw out, I looked at the list, and this is probably more for you, Jane, that was attached to our memo that showed the individual programs. Let me find it here. Community programs, and then the government programs across the 4 categories. And I had several questions about it, but the one I'm going to ask, in the interest of time, is I noticed only one of our advisory boards was mentioned there. None of the others were. And so the question is, how did you think about our advisory boards and their functions in terms of this scoring system? They came in, only one board showed up, at least in what I saw on my sheets. So I was just
yeah, I don't know the answer
puzzled.
to that
Okay.
question, so I'm going to see if somebody else does. Bob, do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay.
No, I think we'll
We'll have
let
to
us
look
get
at
the
that.
information, get back to you.
Yeah.
just a thought, to take a look at that.
Usually the programs are broken out only if they had a cost, so I don't know if that was part of it or not. I'll have to find out.
Okay.
Crystal, then Ken?
Okay, I put a lot of comments on the hotline on the priority-based budgeting, as I did on the CIP, but kind of at 5:45 on the CIP stuff. So I won't go over all of these because they're all out there, but there are 2 areas that were kind of a problem for me. Is like when you have programs like some of our free programs, like that were listed in the paper, like the library concert series and the film series, or the programs in open space or the Parks Department that are free to the public, and that attract families and that attract large numbers. And I look at that as inclusive and socially thriving community. I mean, how do you balance out that? They seem to rank a little bit lower on these sheets. So is that just another kind of mental adjustment that you all do? Or not
So
mental
I can't
adjustment,
speak to like why a particular program got the ranking that it did. But the ones that you mentioned were certainly looked at with regard to things like all of the results, including are we mandated to provide it? Do others provide this kind of a thing? And so it could be that in some of those areas that there are other avenues to have a concert series or a film series or whatever it might be. So that's really the only answer that I can give you, is that when you look across all of the goals and all of the attributes, those particular programs didn't score highly across the board.
And I might add just very briefly that as we've worked with other communities that unfortunately are dealing with a lot worse fiscal situation than you're facing, that there are some serious concerns about what they can continue to fund in their organizations. One of the things that this helps is we look at these things and they're not as relevant. They're not the services that are a have to provide for their citizens. They don't have the tax base to provide it. But what's emerging in these conversations is that the community is stepping up and saying, these are valuable to us, but we understand that we don't have the fiscal base to fund them anymore. So could we start forming partnerships? We found in Lakeland, Florida, one of the first to adopt the model, they had a $62 million budget deficit they were facing. Didn't know it was coming when we started the process, but as they unfolded their revenue aspects, it was pretty bad. What happened is the community stepped up and they started saying, maybe we can partner with you and continue these programs, but not ask the city to continue to fund them at the level they were doing before. So again, those conversations start emerging where you're letting everyone in the community know, this is our situation, here's what we'd like to do. These aren't stupid programs, but when push comes to shove, we may have to make some difficult choices. And so partner with us. Let's figure out how we can continue some of the things that are serving the community, but maybe not only at the city's dollar, but at some other partnership opportunities. So again, it's about the conversations and figuring out what can we do as a community to step up and continue some of these endeavors that the city may not be able to continue over time.
So, Jane, my continuation of the question is, on page 4 of the cover memo that you wrote us, it's got 3 bullet points, and you talk about increased efficiency in any of the 4 quartiles. So I actually, on my hotline comments, I put out about 6 things that I would like to be looking at as part of those efficiencies. And without bringing up every one of them, one of the things is, my question is, when are we going to be looking at efficiencies again? The Blue Ribbon Commission brought up some things. I know all of us had additional comments, but when will we be having that discussion again? When we see the budget, or will there be another opportunity?
It will be when you see the budget, you'll see what we're recommending about things. But if you've got a particular item that you want us to take a look at, we will definitely look at it and bring it back to you. I will tell you that we are doing internal review right now of some aspects of our internal services type funds. I shouldn't say funds, that's the wrong word, but the departments that provide services to internal clients, to see if there are efficiencies that we can provide there. And we've found things. For example, IT has had pretty much a re-look at all of its functions that it applies, and is able to reduce their funding by some dollar amount to save employees' salaries that they could turn into something else. And so we're doing that in many different areas, and you'll see those things as part of the budget.
Well, anyway, they're on the hotline if you guys could take a look at it, you know, give Jane some feedback. But I would like you to take a look at it too.
Right, we definitely saw your comments, and we can get back to you on all of them.
So Ken.
First, I think what this brings out is the complexity of a city of our size and all of the programs that we have to manage. And also, I think it strikes me as a difficult problem to get all of this data in a way that we can make sense of it and it can help us. And I commend staff and our consultants for doing that. And I can't resist a little humor, and I'm practicing because George is going to be out of town for a month, so some of us have to fill in. But I mean, clearly we don't need a bomb squad because we haven't had a bomb go off in 15 years that I've been here. So, and then maybe the pay-for-service model that, you know, if this is the Fifth National Bank, we have a suspicious package, and 911 says, well, can you put up $10,000 for the bomb squad to come? So clearly there are some problems with many of these things that we're going to have to wrestle with that can't be funded by the public. I mean, we're not going to start having neighborhoods hire their own police SWAT team to come in and help them out. So that's a problem. The one thing that I wanted to recommend you think about, coming from big industry, AT&T, where we had, you know, hundreds and hundreds of products, what we're doing is really looking at our product inventory, as the company does off and on. And, you know, one of the things that is difficult is the cross-elasticity of different programs. And that's kind of where I circle back to the bomb squad. Is a police department of our size really viable without a SWAT team and a bomb squad? By themselves, you don't need them very often, or maybe not at all, but if you need them, you really need them. And, you know, what does it take to have a viable program in total? And sometimes that's difficult for the public to come to grips with, and difficult for people to imagine. And also, when you're trying to rate so many things, you know, you're going to get tired, and what do you put in the fourth quartile? That becomes a hard decision. So cross-elasticity of programs, I think, will be difficult to get a hold of, but somehow we have to do that. And then we can, you know, looking at what products can we scale back, which ones can we discontinue, and which ones can we replace with something else that works better, that's more up to date. And I think this is a great way to do that. We've already, eager as we are to get into this stuff, talking about, you know, how can we get the program, can the public get the program? But, you know, this is one of those things that it's easy to sit up here and jump into, but then like everything else here, okay, who pays for the tech support to do that? Who do you call? We're going to have Matt's phone number for tech support for the Excel program. I mean, everything we do has a price, and you know, when you think of a good program, a new one, I think this is a good tool to measure what would the cost be and where does this rate against everything else. So I hope staff can improve our budget process for this year, and it looks like we're on the way to that, and it'll be interesting to see where this goes in the future. One other comment was, I would really like to see our boards and commissions do a lot with respect to rating the whole set. I think that's a group of people that we have spent a lot of time putting in place. It's a broad segment of our community and some people who know a lot about functions of the city. I'd really like to see them have some input at some point to help refine, you know, the rankings eventually.
So that's an interesting idea that we can think about for next year.
Great. Thanks.
So I guess just to sort of wrap up, I think you can count this effort success. It seems like we have lots of questions and a lot of desire to sort of know more and look at how this works, but I think it's very engaging, and I think we'll see even more next year. I think we'll be able to get it refined a little more, and it'll be ever more useful, and hopefully it'll go on into the future that way. But thanks very much, John.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. So while Chris is, while Carl is getting his place, did anybody see him on TV? Does he seem like a TV star? Does he have that sort of familiar look of, I know I've seen him somewhere, your DVD or Channel 8 naked?
He's a movie star now.
Yeah, he is kind of a movie star. He is kind of a movie star.
Susan,
Yes.
just to follow up a little bit on Crystal's question, if we see areas, programs, or that we want to ask about, say, you know, it seems like we could be more cost effective here, or why do we do that? When is the time when we should ask those questions?
Whenever it comes up.
Okay.
Okay. So if now you're filled with questions, then you need to send them to us. But if next March 15th you're like, wow, I suddenly had this great thought, send it. We want to answer it. A thing that I do want to say about it is that if in the next few weeks, we have a lot of work to do as we prepare the budget. And so if we get a host of questions about this and why this program is there and not there, we are probably not going to be able to have the time to answer them, because getting the budget done is the most important thing that we're doing in the next 3 weeks. But we will try to answer as quickly and as well as we possibly can.
Just, I think that Macon's question, how can we get more information from this, would solve some of the problems if we had some access. Because I know a bunch of my questions I put out were just like, what does this mean? What does this mean? How come this title? What does this program include, etc. And if I could just look on something, I'd be more than happy to spend the time doing it. If it's a online document or, you know, in someone's office or a paper document, whatever.
Okay, well, let's try to figure out how we can provide what you need, and we'll give you that information.
I guess.
So,
Are you comfortable with it?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, because, you know, as counselors, much of our lives are centered elsewhere. Only when the budget comes up at a study session, at least, do I really think about these issues, and get filled with the sense of wonder about some programs, about why they're not being staffed differently or where there might be efficiencies and that kind of thing.
Do I sense a book coming up?
No, no books coming up. But I guess in the next 3 weeks, at least what I will be doing is relying on the city staff to be asking the searching questions of itself about where efficiencies can be made. I mean, the bomb squad, I think, occurred to all of us, like, how can it possibly score in the 4th quartile? But on the other hand, you know, Ken's point of, is this something which we should be paying somebody else to cover when we need it, like Denver? Or, I mean, what's the cost of a program like this? And is there a way, when there are calls for a bomb squad and you really need one, is it adequate to have one 30 miles away that would respond? You've been contributing to the training and the equipment and all of that.
Right. So using that as an example, those are all excellent questions that will not be resolved or answered in the next 3 weeks. And so we're finding lots of questions like that we can, at our leisure, so to speak, after we get the budget done in the fall, in the early part of next year, explore those kinds of efficiencies or regional partnerships, and then bring those back for the budget next year. So we're getting information now that will help inform not only the 2011 budget, but also the 2012 and beyond. So.
I would like to mention also that BRC 1, one of the things, and BRC 2 is the full costing of programs. And we are working on a separate, working separately. Tonight you saw direct costs. We're using a very simple method, using full-time equivalent employees, to allocate overhead, to say what really is it when we roll these costs up. So there's many things that are evolving out of this, and it's one of the tools, but it is something that's going to evolve over time. But it's to see where are some of those hidden subsidies that people ask about. So I just wanted to say that's another part that's occurring.